Of interest.
I think the camera might have missed the start, convener, so maybe we just start again. Just
okay.
on the
Technical issues aside, good morning everybody and welcome to this audit committee of the 7th of November. Do we have any apologies?
No, convener, we don't.
Is there any declarations of interest? No. Okay. Item 3, the minutes.
Just to say, convener, and for participants, that due to over-exuberance, this minute was actually included in the agenda for the last meeting, the scrutiny committee, and it's been included in this one, as I say, just through youthful enthusiasm. So it's already been approved by committee, so there's no action required for committee to take this morning, other than maybe just to note that it has already been approved. And with that, we can move on to item 4, convener.
Thank you. Item 4. Who's presenting?
I think it's Sarah McPhee, convener, that's going to lead on this. Sarah.
Good morning. Thank you, convener. I'm actually presenting this report on behalf of our internal audit and risk manager. This report seeks Audit Committee's approval of an updated internal audit charter. The charter sets out the role, authority and responsibility of the internal audit team. Section 4 of the report explains the considerations of the Public Sector Internal Audit Standards of 2017. The standards require that all public sector internal audit providers establish an internal audit charter. You can see in Appendix 1 that the charter is a high-level document. It sets out the role, authority and responsibility of the internal audit team and must be approved by the Audit Committee. Paragraph 5.1 explains that the previous internal audit charter was approved by Audit Committee on the 24th of August 2020. The internal audit charter has recently been reviewed to take into account some minor structure changes which reflect the joint working arrangements with Falkirk Council and consolidates each council's charter into one document. At paragraph 4.3, you will see the internal audit charter will continue to be kept under review and with any changes presented to Audit Committee on a 2-yearly basis or sooner if the changes require it. The committee is therefore asked to consider and approve the internal audit charter attached to Appendix 1. Thank you, and I'm happy to try and answer any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Miko John, do you have anything to say? To ask?
Thank you, Sarah, as well. I note that you're saying that the change is to take into account the working arrangements with other councils and to consolidate the charters across the piece. I just wondered if there was any particular details or any significant change that has been adopted as a result of that.
No, there's been no significant change. It's more wording changes to include the words of Quick Manager Council in there as well. So we have one working document that does the 2 councils.
Okay, thank you for that, convener. That's fine.
Thank you. Councillor Annie? Does anyone, any other councillor wish to ask? Okay, go on to item 5 then, please.
Perhaps, convener, just to interrupt, sorry. Just double check the committee is happy to approve the charter as set out.
Happy to agree.
Happy to agree.
Thank you.
Okay, I believe it's yourself, Sarah, again, please, for item 5.
It is, thank you very much. So this report again has been presented on behalf of the Audit Manager. This report is the 2021-22 Internal Audit Annual Assurance Report. The purpose of this report is to summarise the work internal audit have undertaken over the course of the last year and to provide an overall opinion on the Council's arrangements for risk management, governance and control based on that work. The report also comments on our compliance with public sector internal audit standards. As you can see from section 2, I asked the Audit Committee to note that sufficient internal audit work was undertaken to support a balanced assurance and that internal audit can provide substantial assurance on the Council's arrangements for risk management, governance and control for the year to the 31st of March 2022. In addition, I can report that internal audit met or exceeded its key performance indicators. Section 5 of the report explains that the 2021-22 internal audit plan, which was approved by Audit Committee, was subject to change. Paragraph 5.1 explains that 25 reviews were proposed, 22 were completed by internal audit, 1 is ongoing and 2 have been deferred. The main change to the plan over the course of the year was the deferment to 2022-23 of the planned review of Legionella management arrangements and the annual reciprocal review of West Lothian Council. Excuse me a second. Sorry. At paragraph 5.6, you can see the internal audit performance against the key performance indicators. Paragraph 5.7 highlights that performance dropped slightly in one of the indicators. However, actual performance met or exceeded target for those 3 indicators. The internal audit manager is content, however, that this was appropriate and necessary and was due to priorities, resources and directorate capacity fluctuating and changing during 2021-22. In overall terms, the programme of work was completed within the agreed time allocation. Section 6 of the report comments on our compliance with public sector internal audit standards. These set out the principles and practices that we must comply with, and every year we're required to undertake a self-assessment against the standards. This has given reassurance that we operate in line with the standards. This was undertaken by internal audit during March 2022. There is also a 5-yearly external assessment, which the section last underwent during 2018, and we were found to be compliant. Thank you, and I'm happy to try and answer any of your questions.
Thank you. Councillor Meiklejohn.
Thank you, Convener. Just a couple of questions. One was in relation to the resourcing constraints around the Legionella management and the fact that you hope they'll be resolved. I'm looking for a wee bit more assurance around the fact that we will be able to take that forward, considering the concerns that were raised around our current practices that led to some real challenging circumstances particularly around our schools going forward, which also brings on to just highlighting whether or not we are now as an audit team fully resourced and able to actually do all the work that is planned going forward. Thank you, Convener.
Okay.
Yes. I can assure you that the Legionella work is ongoing just now. It's actually myself who's involved in dealing with that one. The resourcing issues at the time last year, where we were down an internal auditor and we were down a senior internal auditor. I can assure you now we are at a full complement of staff as of October this year. We have recruited our last vacant post, so we are planning to achieve all the work going forward, as long as there's no other risk issues coming in that could substitute some other of the audits we've planned.
Just on that, Convener, just a wee bit more about the fact that despite the fact that you were down resources, you were still able to give substantial assurance. I'm looking for the work was still done to the quality we would expect, and there wasn't a compromise having to be made.
No, there certainly wasn't any compromises to be made. The team that were in place are highly experienced. The audit manager at the time as well has also picked up a lot of work to keep the quality of work going. She's not let that one drop at all. I'm new to the team, and so is one of the other internal auditors. However, we do have the relevant experience to continue and keep the high quality going. We were just 2 audits short from our proposed plan of last year, of which one, the ongoing one, sorry, has now just been completed. I'm about to start one of the outstanding ones from last year as well. So yes, the quality was certainly there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that, Convener.
Councillor Hannah.
Yes, thank you, Convener. I'm a wee bit concerned about the kind of sequencing of things. We're seeing in this report at page, whoops, let me get my notes. At pages 25 and 32, there's reference to the fleet management and there being limited assurance on that matter. Now, at a previous council meeting, we agreed to bring forward the funds for replacement fleet, and yet in this report, subsequent to that previous one, we're seeing that there remains some scope for improving controls. So can we have some assurances that that matter has been resolved? Obviously, since this report has come to us so late, I am assuming that there will have been things, but I think we need assurance that we, in bringing forward those monies, have not put those monies into a difficult situation.
Mr. Benny, could you answer that, please?
Thank you, Convener. Through you, thank you, Councillor Hannah, for the question, and I think it is a good point to raise at the Audit Committee. Fleet services is an area where I've invested a good amount of time since I began with the Council in January of this year. This particular audit concluded in April 2022, and an action plan was created to respond to it. In June 2022, I asked Internal Audit to carry out a follow-up review to assess the extent of the improvements that had been made. And this highlighted some further work that needed to be undertaken. I'm pleased to update that since that secondary review and under a kind of new leadership team, we've addressed the points that have been raised, and I'm now confident we've got robust practices in place within fleet services. I'm also pleased to update that these will continue to be improved and reviewed following the appointment of our new fleet manager, Mark Cox, and whose appointment I was delighted to see take place this autumn. So I think in answer to your question, we have addressed the matters that have been raised, and I'm confident that the investment that the capital plan has earmarked for fleet will be appropriate and beneficial to this council.
Councillor Hannah?
Thank you.
Is there any other? So, is there any other councillor wishing to ask? Go, Councillor Forrest.
Page 26, National Fraud Initiative. As a result of the participation in this exercises, 13 instances of wrongly claimed discounts totalling £6,000 was identified. What exactly has been learned from this?
The £6,000 wrongly claimed discount, what tends to be find, as soon as it's been identified there's been a wrongly claimed discount, our fraud team who do the matches on this one send out notification to the individuals. I can't tell you exactly what was at fault for each individual one of these, but I can actually say in general terms what happened is somebody has turned 18 in the property and the parent hasn't realised the impact of this will have on their single person discount. As soon as it's been notified, it's rectified on that point and they no longer claim the single person discount. As for the exact amount and the exact reason for the 6,000, unfortunately I don't have that to hand at the minute.
Something as simple as that. Thank you very much.
Is there any other questions?
Yes.
Councillor Hannah.
Thank you, Convener. A general point about the appendix or appendices, just a plea that for the future, when you've got two terms that have the same acronym, that you don't use the acronym, because you've got not applicable and you've got the no assurance, both are N/A. So it would be useful if that was always put out in full. I'd also like to ask about on page 24, the corporate and housing services, the procurement and housing property support and follow-up stage 1 is not applicable. Could you clarify that, please?
The reason why the follow-ups are not applicable is because we're actually following up on what our recommendations are and have they been implemented and at what stage they're for implementation. We've already given our assurance on the in-depth of the audit, and we're now only following up on what our recommendations are and where they are in implementing them. In order to do another audit with assurance attached, it means another full audit and not just looking at the certain area of the recommendations. Point is also noted about the not applicable versus no assurance. I'll take that back in order to clarify any future reports.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Patrick.
Yes, thank you. I would like to refer us on to page 29, and this is under the heading of Following the Pandemic Pound, and it relates to COVID-19 costs. And the report showing that a total of 191 transactions didn't have supporting documentation, which amounted to just short of £1 million, 910,785. I'm just really wondering, what risk does this present to the council, and also perhaps even just an explanation as really what these related to, and do we now have the capacity to ensure that all documentation is provided, because reports saying that that copies of invoices weren't available, I think, for these 191 transactions. So just a little bit more background about what this actually refers to, and if we've got systems in place now to ensure that this doesn't happen in future.
Sorry, I'll have to come back to you with regards to the backup to the 191 transactions. It's just eluding me at the moment as to what it is exactly, which ones they were. I do remember reading something about it, but it's just not quite at the forefront of my brain at the moment. Yes, we do have, there is practices in place. This always gets highlighted from an audit that if there's areas of weakness, that the management are notified of this and they have to provide comment on how they're going to improve it. I'm sure, as I say, in the back of my head that the 191 we did get in the end, but I will definitely follow up and come back to you with that one.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Okay. Are we happy to agree that item?
Happy to agree, Prop.
Agreed.
Okay, move on to item 6. Sarah, I believe it's you again.
Sorry, I was just writing the notes of what I was coming back with. Thank you again. This paper is our proposed programme of work for 2022-23. You'll note at paragraph 4.2 and 4.3 there was some resourcing issues with the team carrying 2 vacancies over the last year. Interim arrangements were put in place, but this has continued to impact the delivery of the internal audit programme. Permanent staff have now been employed, with the final members of the team starting in October. Taking this into consideration, I have recognised that the internal audit team will need to be flexible and reactive, taking account of resources and emerging risks. On that basis, this year's plan is split as follows. At Appendix 1, I've listed those assignments we are committed to undertaking on an annual basis. Most of these are externally driven, regulatory types and reviews. Appendix 2 lists our committed assignments being undertaken. They will remain the need to be flexible, and any of these assignments not completed in 2022-23 due to changes to the Council's risk profile or competing priorities will be rolled forward into next year's plan. Appendix 3 provides details around the work we've committed to undertaking for various other clients to whom we provide services. At paragraph 5.12, highlights that each year an internal audit annual assurance report is presented to committee. Internal audit will give an overall opinion on the Council's risk management, governance and control arrangements based on the work internal audit has carried out over the course of the year at June Audit Committee. The report will also include a summary of the work undertaken in 2022-23. To finish, I draw your attention to the recommendations at paragraph 2.1. In particular, can I ask that committee approves the internal audit plan for the year, but to bear in mind the need to be flexible, and the internal audit will direct resources to where they're most needed. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ms McPhee. Councillor Meikle-John.
Thank you, convener. I just wanted to ask a wee bit about what's the anticipated outcome. Do we anticipate that we will be able to manage to do 100% of the audit this year? And in saying that, is there capacity for any additional work that may require or evolve throughout the year that requires attention, as obviously we are in a very challenging financial climate, and that there may be things emerge that we would want audit to have a further look at as well. So just about that capacity to be able to actually deliver. And I did see somewhere around our performance targets, and I just wondered if we were able to give assurance on that.
As we stand just now, yes, we are planning to do 100% of the work. We cannot anticipate anything that is unbeknown to us to come in order to stop the work. If anything comes in that due to the change in the risk environment within the council, yes, we will look to see how we can slot that in. It might mean we have to change some of the audits about, move some to next year in order to take into account the new work this year. It's something will have to be looked at as needs require. But going forward, we are proposing to carry out 100% of the work.
Councillor Hannah.
In Appendix 1, there's reference to COVID-19 recovery as a risk mitigated. Could you clarify that, please? I think some of us are not convinced that COVID-19 has left us yet. So could you say a little more about how you would regard it as risk mitigated?
I also would say COVID hasn't left us. I'm sitting here positive. Yeah, COVID has risk has been mitigated as part of what's on the risk register. We would probably say compared to all the offices being shut down, which was at the height of COVID, there was more risks associated then. There was less management of things because everybody was working from home. More people are back to work, back to the office, getting back to business as normal in that sense. And that's probably where the risk mitigated parts come from. We always have to keep in the back of our mind COVID is still going to be a risk, and we always still have to be aware that it will take staff out of the workforce, but it's not going to be on the same extent as we had when we were all given the offices closed, immediately work from home stance.
Thank you.
Does anyone else has questions to ask? Are we all agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much, Ms. V, especially the appreciation you're doing this while having COVID. Thank you. In that case, we'll move to agenda item 7.
And that's back to me again. Sorry, you're going to be fed up of hearing me. Thank you, Kavina. This report is a result of the Ernst & Young recommendation to review our whistleblowing policy and anti-fraud and corruption strategy to ensure we remain in line with good practice. After this report, the committee considered fraud-related performance and a summary of work undertaken within Corporate Fraud Team and agreed the introduction of the recommended Corporate Fraud Team performance indicators. Today's report provides an update on these areas and also provides a corporate fraud action plan for 2022-23. As you can see from section 2, I can ask the Audit Committee to note the progress with updating the fraud-related documents and to consider fraud-related performance and summary of work undertaken with the Corporate Fraud Team for the year so far. In addition, to consider the Corporate Fraud Action Plan for 2022-23 and note progress will be reported to elected members 6 monthly. It was understood that the review and alignment of the documents was more complex than initially assumed, so paragraph 5.3 sets out the current position of each of the documents with authorising entity. In summary, out of the 6 documents stated, 4 have been agreed and are published on our intranet and our website. The remaining 2, Code of Conduct for Members and Officers and the Register of Interests and Gifts, are currently being reviewed. Appendix 1 highlights the corporate fraud team's performance to date. Section 2 highlights the preventative work of the team and how the adaptations during the pandemic are continuing or being investigated as to how to continue the work for a more hybrid workforce. Section 4 details the referrals made to the team and how many are still outstanding and how many have been cleared and closed. Appendix 2 details the Corporate Fraud Action Plan for the year 2022-23. This has been split into 4 main areas with further details within fraud investigations, fraud prevention, development, proactive work. Thank you, and I'm happy to try and answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms Fee. Councillor Meikle-John.
Thank you, Convener. A couple of questions. You mentioned the documents that have been uploaded to the internet and the website accordingly. I just wonder if there is anything being done to draw people's attention to those, and if there's any monitoring of who and who's looking at them, and therefore what impact that's actually having. Not unrelated is around the toolbox session, which was organised and didn't take place due to lack of interest. Are we looking to approach that in a different way, so that information can be shared and people can be made avail of the information around that? And I'll give you all the questions and then I'll let you come back. The other thing is what work's going on with the services around corporate fraud, other than the documentation, so that everybody is aware of it and is mindful in their current practices. And we have, obviously, we've got the list at the end around where things are and a timetable. What we don't have is where they are in the process, and I don't know whether it's possible to look at providing a wee bit more of a real-time information in relation to progress and what's completed, what's not, and what's in the plan. Thank you.
Okay, I'll try and get through those. As to uploaded to the website and who's looking at it, it's something I'll have to take back to the corporate fraud team to see if there is a method of monitoring this. I'm not entirely sure how or if we can monitor it online, but that's something I can take back to the corporate fraud team to investigate. As regards to the toolbox talks, and are these being done in a different guise? As far as I'm aware, they are investigating how they can take forward the toolbox talks. I'm not, again, entirely sure at what position they are currently at with it, but I will seek advice and clarity from them and report back for you. Same, unfortunately, is working with the other services. What are they doing? How are they doing it? I will have to check back to them. Apologies for not having the answers for this. Our manager is actually off sick who manages them, so I'm sort of trying my best here to stand in with it. But yeah, I'll try and get more clarity on it. Sorry, what was the fourth question again? Is it where the work was at?
Yeah, so it was just, is there some real-time information about where the progress is rather than just the dates, so that we know where it is in the actual process?
Yep, no problem. Again, I'm sorry to say I will have to go back to the corporate fraud team to find out exactly where is and what is everywhere standing things are. So I'll get back to you with that, but I've taken a note of the questions.
Thank you. And we can maybe get the feedback and circulate it to the audit committee.
No problem.
Ms Temple, I believe you wanted to say.
Yes, thank you, Convener. I think one of the things I wanted to say was a big thank you to Sarah for all her hard work today, and for covering the reports on behalf of Isabel, and I think she's done really well. In terms of fraud, I think fraud has probably been impacted, the fraud resource has been impacted in sort of two ways. One is through Isabel's absence has obviously put a little bit more pressure on the fraud team, but also as we're aware of the recent whistleblowing allegations. So a lot of the fraud team's attention has been devoted to that. My understanding from a brief conversation with the team leader for the corporate fraud team is that we are reasonably confident that we'll be able to tackle the action plan. There may be a little bit of a delay in terms of the dates that are there, but we're reasonably on track. I think what we're wanting to do is have some discussion. We've been liaising with I can't remember the right name, I'm going to say it, but with our colleagues in the police, and we've been working with them to develop some training toolbox talks. Now those are focused on elected members, but the discussion we're currently having is whether we need to expand that to include senior management and some officers and things like that. So there's a piece of work going on just now to look at how we can best present this information and make sure there's a good uptake of it, and that the messages are getting out across the piece. So we have gone back to the police sergeant in particular that we're dealing with. We're waiting for a response from them, and then we want to look at where we start to roll that out and how we most effectively roll that out. So as we've talked about, we've had some of these whistleblowing allegations and things. There may be a sort of structure related to that in terms of how we start to roll out some of this information. I think for the team, which is only a small team, there's two in the corporate fraud team supported by Sarah and Isabel. I think what we were focused on was getting the most recent pieces of work relating to whistleblowing and things out of the way. So fortunately that work has come to an end. Thanks.
Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Councillor Spears?
Thank you, Convener. It's regarding corporate fraud action plan implications on page 53, item 7.1. Appropriate financial controls need to be in place to prevent and restrict fraud. Can you tell me the amount of financial controls and how much it will cost?
Ms. Temple.
I think the financial controls, that's not necessarily looking for something new to be implemented or added in with a cost to it. That's just about how we go about our business across the council on a day-to-day basis. So as you can imagine, the types of financial controls we have in place, whilst there will be some similarity right across the board, there'll be very different transactions that come in at different points, and we need to make sure that for all of those transactions, there's the appropriate controls in place. So a really simple example of that is that no one can authorise an order and authorise an invoice. We have to have two people involved in every purchase that we make to make sure that there's someone having some oversight of that purchase. And what we do find is that in times of, for example, during COVID, and we were making self-isolation grants and these kind of things, we had to amend and review our financial controls for those transactions to make sure they were robust for the volumes of transactions that we had and the type of information that came in. So I think the reference in paragraph 7.1 is just to make sure that for any financial transaction that's happening across the council, that we have the appropriate financial controls in place, and we take assurance from the work that internal audit do and the work that external audit do, and that's part of the assurance reports that they give us at the end of the year to make sure that those controls are operating effectively.
Would that be the same answer with 7.2 resources directly?
Thank you, through you, Convener. For paragraph 7.2, I think we're really just recognising that when fraud allegations come in terms of just as a generic point, there's a significant amount of resource that goes into investigating any allegations that come in, and that can be and is usually through our corporate fraud team, which, as I say, is 2 people, or it can be if our external auditors feel that they need to get engaged in the process, they will be involved as well. And in some cases, we would also have some support from HR, for example. So depending on the complexity of the allegation, it can take up quite a lot of council resource to investigate thoroughly. And paragraph 7.2 is really just highlighting that fact, but it's still what we need to do, and it's the right thing to do to direct resource to these areas.
So what you're saying is there is no cost implication?
I think, well, I suppose there's 2 cost implications. One is through loss of council resources if someone's perpetrating a fraud. So obviously we need to try and stop that. The other is that our external auditors may charge us an additional cost if they feel that they've had to put significant resource into investigating a fraud, but we don't have control over that to some extent, because they will do what they see fit to be able to provide assurance on the annual audit report, and they will tell us how much they have spent. They won't ask for our permission in advance, if you see what I mean. So there are potential cost implications from that point of view. Our auditors will incur the resource that they feel they need to incur to be able to give us assurance on our annual audit report.
So I go back to my original question. Is there a financial figure for that?
There's not a financial figure per se that we can put our finger on, because it would depend on the nature of the allegation and the nature of the work that our external auditors feel they want to do. And it would also depend on what they decide is a reasonable charge for that work. In terms of 21-22, they have indicated a cost for our fees, which will be part of, which we'll report back, and that's around about £23,000. But what I would hope is that for 22-23, we won't incur any of these costs, and we won't have that kind of fee levied at us.
Councillor Hannah.
Thank you, Convener. You've said a fair bit about the whistleblowing allegations, but I would like to just ask a couple of questions about page 57. First of all, the question is about which services do the whistleblowing allegations. I think it would be useful if it was included as to whether they're all related or unrelated and in completely different separate parts of the council's business. So that would be a useful clarification, first of all. Secondly, a little concern about the timescales on which the investigations are being undertaken, given that we've got, of the 5 cases that were carried forward from 21-22, 3 are still ongoing. I wonder if you could say a little about the complexity of the issues and whether this is due to the lack of staffing to do the proper investigation, or if it's due to the complexity of the issues involved.
Thank you, Councillor Hannah. I think in terms of the investigations themselves, as you've said, they are very complicated, or they can be very complicated. Now, there can be allegations that are investigated and resolved very quickly, and we've seen that quite recently. There can be allegations that take a lot more time to resolve and involve a lot more people, a lot more investigation, and interviewing all the people involved and the teams and trying to go through documentation, CCTV footage, whatever it happens to be that would support or disprove an allegation. So I think I'm less concerned about the resource in the team. I think it's more about the complexity of the allegation and therefore the investigation, and also where we have external support for an investigation. So, for example, if our external auditors are involved, then we have less sort of control over the timeframes for that as well, in terms of what they feel they need to do, as I say, to be able to provide us with assurance. And also, I think the other point is it depends on how many areas of the council are involved. So quite often, because of the nature of a whistleblowing investigation, we will need HR support, we may need procurement support, may need governance support, just depends, as well as the services that are involved in the allegation itself. So they can be complex and they can take quite a long time, but at this point I'm not concerned about the resource in the team. Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have questions? No. I have one question, and it's regarding page 58 to 61. I'm just a little bit concerned at the timescales that's in there, given you're catching up with resources and what have you, because most of them seem to be around December, and there's a couple that says October.
Thank you, convener. I think one of the things I would maybe say is that when we first drafted this report, it was for an earlier committee, because as we know, the committee ended up being sort of deferred. I will and have asked the team leader to give me an update on the full action plan, and I will update committee. We do say that we'll come back twice yearly, but if we feel that it would be beneficial to have an earlier update, I'm happy to bring it back to the next audit committee.
Thank you.
Convener, on that, I think it might well be helpful to bring a more up-to-date, so that we actually get a proper view of where things are. And I don't know whether in future it's possible to bring a RAG rating, so that we know what's on target, what's completed, and anything that is being delayed or fallen by the wayside.
Thank you. Any more questions? Do we all agree this? Oh, sorry, Councillor Hannah.
Just one other issue. I'm pleased to see that the fraud prevention training is going to be put into place. I look forward, as everybody knows, I'm always keen to get training on these matters. But can I ask that it is expedited? I noticed in a subsequent report, as well as the risk management training talked about, we've talked about the training for the audit committee as a whole. It would be really useful if that was sooner rather than later, in that we are scrutinising material at the moment without having had that detailed training, and that is not entirely comfortable. So I think it's important that the training's brought forward as soon as is possible.
Ms. Temple.
Thank you, convener. I would agree. I mean, I think we have got some improvement in terms of our resource, and we've got a full complement of staff, but we are having some issues, as we've discussed, with absence, and so that has deferred or delayed training. And I think certainly we would have hoped that all the audit committee training would have been completed by this point in the year, and recognise that that hasn't happened. So that's certainly something that I will pick up with the audit manager and see how we can best design that training to cover all the areas, because it's obviously the audit committee, processes, risk, fraud, all of these areas. How do we how we want to deliver that? So I will take that point on board and come back hopefully with a date soon.
Thank you.
Is there any more questions? Can we agree this agenda item?
Agreed.
Okay. And we'll move on to agenda item 8, please.
Thank you, convener. Excuse me. So I'll be quite brief. This report presents an updated risk management assurance policy and framework for consideration by the Audit Committee and for onward referral to the Executive. The policy is included in Appendix 1, which is on page 66 of the agenda, and the areas that have changed have been highlighted in yellow. And this follows the last consideration of the policy by Audit Committee in October 2021. So at this point, we've updated the policy through discussions at the Corporate Risk Management Group and through CMT, and we haven't made significant changes to the policy. There's been an update to roles and responsibilities across the Council in respect of risk. We are still proposing that the Corporate Risk Management updates will come to the Audit Committee and the Executive on a quarterly basis. We're still recognising that members may want to refer some matters to the Scrutiny Committee where necessary. I just draw your attention to section 5.2 of the report, which highlights that guidance and templates and things are being reviewed to help ensure the policy is being applied consistently across the Council. And as we've talked about, risk training will be scheduled to support both members and officers. But given the current pressures across the board, and particularly in respect of preparing for the budget exercise in sort of February, March, we are thinking that it's likely that training will take place for risk specifically towards the sort of start of the second quarter of 2023. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Councillor Meikle-John.
Thank you, convener, and I'm a wee bit concerned that just because of the budget setting process, etc., that the training around risk is so late in coming forward. I think it perhaps leaves some members at a disadvantage in doing that. Something that we've not got into in the councils, and it's public sector tend to be a wee bit averse to this because they are risk averse by the sheer nature of the services we provide, but we need to start to have discussions around our risk appetite and understand what that is. And that also I think it would be helpful to have even a structured diagram that is brought to the Audit Committee for everybody to understand where they fit into that risk management. What's the responsibility of the service, what's the responsibility of the corporate management team, but more importantly, what's the responsibility of elected members in doing all of that. And I appreciate risk is probably a very dry subject for some, but it's also a very important subject that I think we need to actually have a conversation around so that people are comfortable about looking at the risks that are to our organisation, but also to our communities, but also about how we manage and mitigate those and what tools we have at our disposal. So that's why I think it's very late in the day to have that training for elected members, and that there maybe needs to be more of an emphasis on that, and particularly in the papers that we have coming to us about the risks and the potential there to us. So I just want to make that comment, but I do appreciate the services is under a lot of restrictions just now with staff absence and the preparations for the budget, but I think it does go hand in hand with the responsibilities that the council as a whole has.
Ms Templeton.
Thank you, convener. I don't disagree with anything that's been said, and I think it is at this point in time, I'm just thinking of the sort of capacity for the service overall, but also for officers and members, because we know we've set up so many groups and working groups to try and take a lot of the work forward, particularly around the budget, and that is obviously addressing one of our kind of highest corporate risks. So I think it is about that sort of sense of we are actively undertaking risk management through that work. The training is the thing that I think at this point we're struggling to resource. So it's certainly something I will take away and consider further. I think it's a valid point. We have had some discussions about risk appetite, and I think we've talked about trying to have a sort of workshop session to sort of better understand people's views on these kind of areas. We set target risks as part of our corporate risk register, but it's the sense in which what we can do with those target risks and how that makes us take action or decisions so that would help us to get to those target risks. There is a diagram on page 70 of the agenda which sets out the risk management reporting framework, but I would concede that it's not necessarily the most sort of helpful diagram. In some ways it's very factual just in terms of what reports, for example, each area of the council will get and how they'll consider them. But I think that's something that we feel we could refine. And then finally, I think the only other comment I'd make is just in terms of 5.2 and looking at the guidance and templates. The bottom bullet point at 5.2.1 references the committee papers and the risk consideration sections. And I would say that that's an area that we're very conscious we need to improve. We need to take a more consistent approach. Similar to some of the discussions we've had around how issues of sustainability, for example, are presented in those reports. So we are having those discussions within finance in terms of the internal audit and risk side of it, but we've also been having those discussions at CMT to look at how we can improve that. So that's an action that I would hope to see us moving on quite quickly. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Amanda. And I just wonder if there's capacity to look at using either the improvement service or our external auditors to assist with doing some of the risk training, and that could perhaps take some pressure off internally as well.
Councillor Spears.
I tend to agree with the Leader of the Council's concerns over training while we go into our budget deliberations. There's been much talk about the scale and the size of the cuts that are coming forward in the budget. How will we apply these risk formulas to these particular cuts and everything that is determined by Council to cut? Will we be getting a risk assessment on any motions or any deliberations that are brought forward on cuts?
Thank you, Convener and Councillor Spears. I think that's a really helpful question. I think it links to what we were saying to some extent about the committee reports. So if a report's coming forward to Council, looking at a service reduction, for example, it should be very specific in terms of what the implications of that reduction are, and also what mitigation there is, if mitigation can be identified for any service reduction or any service change for that matter. And we also have the process of the EPIAs, which is the Equality, Poverty, Impact Assessments. And so any suggestion for a service reduction or amendment in policy that's coming forward should have an EPIA with it. That EPIA should be clear on what the implications are, and it should be clear where there's mitigation identified and what that mitigation looks like. So I think it is sort of incumbent on us as officers to make sure that we are providing the appropriate information to members to help you support you in your decision making process.
Councillor Spears.
Thank you.
Councillor Hannah? No. Does anyone else have any further questions? Councillor Meikle-John.
It was just around the drawing back of doing the deep dive, some scrutiny, and that and I appreciate that there's some work being done to look at how that could be done. I think we maybe lose something. I do appreciate that that can be very time consuming, but I think there has to be the ability to be able to do some of that underlying and analysis work when there's areas that we're not sure why it's not performing as it should, and just want to understand where that is now going to lie if it's not going to come through scrutiny.
Ms Temple.
Thank you, Convener, Councillor Winkelstein. Our proposal is that we, this committee, for example, could still request that a risk goes to scrutiny if they feel that more work is needing to be done on it or they need to understand it better. I think what we wanted to step back from was a sort of process, a routine process of taking matters to scrutiny where we weren't always, the benefit of doing that and that exercise wasn't always particularly clear or obvious, and they were taking up a lot of officers' time and also members' time and consideration through the committee. So I suppose what we're wanting to do is say it's a much more sort of targeted approach. So if this committee felt that something needed to go to scrutiny, that there's still the current risk management policy and framework still allows for that to happen. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Hannah.
Thank you, Convener. Just on that, when we do get round to getting our audit training, audit committee training, I think it's important that it also covers scrutiny, because the two issues, audit and scrutiny, are very closely linked. And I think it's important that we have very clear boundaries. If there are two committees, we need to be crystal clear about what things are appropriate for the audit committee, what things are appropriate for scrutiny committee, what sorts of things would we be referring to scrutiny. If we are to be transparent in our scrutiny of council decisions and council reports, we really need to have that clarified.
Ms Temple.
I'm happy to take that on board when we're looking at the audit training. I think that's reasonable to understand the different roles of each committee.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any more questions? No. Then are we happy to agree this item?
Agreed.
Okay, then let's move to the final item 9, please.
Thank you, Convener. Apologies. It took me a while to find my page. So the report for item 9 is an update on the corporate risk register, an update on an exception report flowing from the service assurance statements, and an update on the risk management improvement plan. Appendix 1 of the document shows a summary of the high corporate risks, and paragraph 5.1.2 of the report highlights some of the planned work to improve the quality of the information that's included in that appendix moving forward. There hasn't been significant changes to the corporate risk register and the ratings in there, but we have recognised that we need to dedicate time to refreshing the corporate risk register, particularly in light of the new council plan and the financial strategy. And so, as we've referenced already, we're planning to work with members and the senior leadership group to look at the corporate risk register and also to consider new and emerging risks. So a bit of horizon scanning, as they call it, to make sure that our risk register is up to date. Section 5.2 of the report covers the service assurance statements exception report, and that information is presented in more detail at Appendix 2, which is on page 86 of the agenda. Again, further work is planned to improve the completeness of information, and as services are updating their service plans on the back of the new council plan, we would expect that the service risk registers will be updated and better reflecting the work that's set out in the service plan. Section 5.3 covers the risk management plan, and that's included in Appendix 3, which is on page 88 of the agenda. So as we've discussed, at this point, CMT has reviewed the arrangements for risk management and it's identified some areas for improvement. We've set out some changes to the corporate risk management arrangements in paragraphs 5.3.5, but we have recognised in the report and in the discussion today that further discussion with members and officers is required. And this, for me, risk management and our risk management processes and plans is really a work in progress. So we are open to refining what we do, and we are open to having the discussions with members and officers to look at how we can improve it. I have said, we've mentioned it in our previous paper and it's referenced in 5.3.7 that some of the work is we're planning to do, we were now planning to defer because of capacity issues and the focus on the budget. And as I say, recognising that financial sustainability is one of the Council's corporate risks and that we are clearly actively managing that risk by a lot of the work and the groups and things that we've set up. I think I'd just like to say, you know, risk is quite a complicated area. As you said, it can be quite a dry area. And, you know, I would like to sort of thank our corporate risk coordinator. He does do a huge amount of work to support services, to identify the risks, document the risks, consider the risks, and looking at where we can improve risk management across the council. In CMT, we have committed to improving our arrangements, but it takes a lot of work to do that. And as I say, I think we're on a journey at the moment, and it is a work in progress. So it's certainly, we recognise the importance of it, and we just need to schedule that work in accordingly. But thank you. I'm happy to take any questions.
Councillor Meikle-John.
Thank you. A few questions there. I'll give you them again, all in one, Amanda, and do my best here. The first one was around the horizon scanning, and we used to have kind of state of the nation reports that came from both SIPFA and Audit Scotland to Audit Committee, and I think it would be helpful for members to be able to see some of that. I noticed that you know, in the report it talks about the senior management team reviewing that and looking at how elected members can be involved. But I think being able to have signposting to where the information is, so that that would be helpful, and maybe something that the Audit Committee might want to certainly at least once or twice a year is consider, you know, just a report on that horizon scanning, so that we are cited on things that may or may not be coming towards us, and it is good practice to do that. The other aspect was there's a number of areas within the summary of the corporate risks that have to be confirmed because there's assessments to be carried out. There's quite a few of those to be carried out, and as a result it doesn't give a complete view, so it'd be helpful to have an indication of timescales to when those maybe are anticipated to being completed, and finally, it really is to highlight how dynamic is our corporate risk register, and that how often is it updated, and would there be, by exception, if there was a heightened risk being reported to members. Thank you, Convener.
Councillor Temple. Ms Temple.
Thank you. So, I mean, I think again, I don't disagree with anything that's been said, and I think we could look at we present our quarterly corporate risk management reports to Audit Committee, and we could certainly look at how we incorporate the horizon scanning that you referred to, and I think it's how we. I think what we've tried to reflect in the paper is certainly from what we can see, services are very actively managing risk, and we discuss risk as a constant part of the discussion at any meeting for any topic. The risks of non-delivery, the risks around control, all of these things are a constant part of the discussion, which I think gives me a lot of comfort that the council is very actively managing risk. I think where we need to do some further work, which I think is reflected in the risk management plan, is how we more effectively embed that work into what we are doing, so that things like updating the corporate risk register is not seen as a separate task to the actual management of a task in the first place. And as you've recognised, there are updates that we need to get for the corporate risk register. At the moment, we try and push services to update their corporate risk register on a quarterly basis as a minimum. So by the time you get the next one, that should have been done. And I certainly know in our service, we've gone through a process to do that. But I think what we're looking for is that way to better embed that into what we're doing on a regular basis, and to make it more dynamic, as you've said. And certainly I think that we are aware of significant risks. I think, again, we tend to manage those in that we do tend to escalate those. So if we think of COVID, for example, or we think of energy, these things are referenced in various reports. If I think of energy in particular, in terms of the war in Ukraine, you know, we have flagged that up on many occasions in our finance reports, for example. We're showing that we're actively monitoring and managing that situation, and there's briefings on the Ukrainian position in terms of the refugees and the impact on the local area. So these things are all being actively managed, and in some ways I think that's better, because it's not seeing risk as a separate thing. It's actively sort of reporting on it as part of our day-to-day business. So I feel that I feel some reassurance. I think that any new heightened risks would naturally form part of our reporting to members, but I certainly think, in terms of how dynamic we are with risk, we can improve how we update, and that's part of what we need to do through our risk management plan.
Thank you, Ms Templeton. Councillor Spears.
Thank you. Hello?
Yeah.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, hear you fine.
Right, it's on page 87, the service assurance statement, transformation of communities, and the division housing and communities, bullet point 4. I wonder what your horizon scanning is regarding poverty is rated as high, but there is substantial assurance on the actions being taken to address income maximisation, but there are still significant risk uncertainty, that's an understatement, due to the energy and cost of living, etc. I hope our horizon scanning is not crystal ball gazing. Can you further elaborate on that and what we're doing to help people in these circumstances at present?
Ms Templeton.
Thank you, convener. Thanks, Councillor Spears. I'm not quite sure. I can see the Director of Transformation Communities and Corporate Services has come in and may want to pick up on this. I mean, I think what this is reflecting is that clearly we know it's a high risk, and we also know that it's a very likely scenario. So it will score high on both likelihood and impact. The substantial assurance comes from the actions that we are taking, which I'm sure Mrs. Algie is going to come on to. I think it's challenging, but it's recognising that the council is trying to do what it can to improve the situation. But I think the difficulty that we have is the extent to which we are able to tackle poverty as a whole across the district. But I'll let My colleague.
Ms Sardi?
Yes, thank you, Convener. Happy to pick that up. Convener, we did present a report to Council in June with a wide range of actions that the Council is taking to try and address poverty. It's an exceptionally difficult issue out in the communities, as everyone will be aware. And as Amanda said, it is high in respect of the risk that is out in communities at this point in time. Members will recall that we also put some additional funding in there, both through the household support grants and through the leader funding, and by putting in some additional posts which are in the process of being advertised to support income maximisation. So there is a wide range of actions currently taking place. There was a briefing note for members that was circulated a couple of weeks ago on some of these actions, and I'm happy to send that out again if it would be of help. And there is also a report being prepared for Council in December, which will come to members with the range of actions across the Council that we're taking to try and address poverty. So in this respect, there's substantial assurances, as Mrs Templeman says, around the actions that we are taking, but the risk is still high because of all the varying factors that are out there in the communities around the cost of living. Thank you.
Councillor Spears, does that answer your question?
Well, I don't think there is an answer to the question, to be honest. I think everybody's in for a really, really difficult time. And the difficult time started a couple of months ago. So us getting things in place now for December, you know, you're halfway through winter. And we really need to be really sharp on this because people are suffering just now.
Thank you, Councillor Spears. Councillor Hannah?
Thank you, Convener. Thank you, Councillor Spears, for raising that issue, because that was one of the issues that I wanted to raise. I'm very pleased to hear that the posts have 5 months after the decision was made been advertised, and I would also kind of back up Councillor Spears and his point that it really is important that we do things and we do things quickly. The problems of cost of living and the impact on the problems of poverty, not just of our most vulnerable citizens, but also people on middle incomes are suffering as well. And we have to get out there to do more promotional work in terms of income maximisation. It's not the answer to all the problems, but it is part of the answer. Second issue I'd like to raise is we are now talking about there being 3 assessments covered in every council report. There's the equalities impact, climate change impact, and now we're going to have risk covered also. Can I please ask you to put all the information in the same section of every report? In this report, we've got climate change at 3.1 and we've got climate change at 7.5, equalities at 7.4. It just would be much easier for busy councillors when they're going through reports if these things were put into the same section, either at the beginning or at the end. I don't really mind, as long as they're in the same place. At first, I thought there wasn't an equalities impact point in this report because it didn't come to the very end. The third point I would like to raise is on Appendix 1, and I'm slightly confused about the way these are talked about in terms of impact being high or medium. In public protection, harm to adults and children, you've got inherently high impact cannot be reduced to medium. In leadership, decision making, etc., you've got reduced from medium to high. Now, you either which way is it? Is it reduced from medium to high? And if so, I must go and do some research to understand what high and medium mean. It seems to me that high is higher than medium, and it would be increased from medium to high and reduced from high to medium. But if you could clarify that for me, please, so that I can actually understand what Appendix 1 says.
Thank you, Councillor Hannah. Councillor Algie, you want to come back in?
Sorry, convener, were you looking for me to respond to that particular point?
If you can, please.
Yes, certainly happy to pick that up. On the risk register, you have certainly the leadership one. It's reducing from medium to high because the risk hasn't, I accept how it's been worded, but it's the risk has increased. So it's a higher risk is a reducing situation. I accept that the terminology is not clear there, and we probably need to look at that, and we can look at that for the next report, absolutely.
Ms Templeton?
Yes, thank you, convener. I just to echo what my colleague's saying, I can absolutely understand the confusion, and I think we can certainly make that better. I think it's about, as Karen saying, it's about a reducing or a picture that is getting worse as opposed to better. What I would say is, in terms of the first risk around harm to adults and children, what we are saying is that we cannot amend that risk to have a medium impact because regardless of what we do, any harm to adults and children will have an high impact. It's just inherently high, and we can't change that. So we have to recognise that. What we can affect is the likelihood of that impact to some degree, but the impact will always be high, and we won't be able to change that. But I'm happy to take the wording away and amend and improve. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr Perry?
Thank you. Maybe just on the point of report format, there's been some comments throughout this morning on the format and content of reports. There is an action for me for next year to undertake a review of report formats as part of my services service plan. So that's something we'll do, and we'll take on board all the comments. It's probably just worth noting though, in terms of the shape of reports just now, it was a decision of council this time last year to insert after the recommendations the climate change. So that's there for a very specific reason. The implications section was always at the end of the report, but this was a specific request by council to put that at the start of the report. Next year, when we look at the report format, we'll look at all of this and all of the comments which have been made today.
Anything else, Councillor?
Yeah, thank you for that. I'll just make a plea for reports being shorter and clearer. I think we would all appreciate that. The other thing I would like to kind of maybe go back to is to Mrs. Algie to say about the posts in terms of the income maximisation. Just a plea to have that expedited. As Councillor Spears was saying, winter is fast approaching, and the problems that people are going to have are huge.
Ms. Algie?
Yeah, thank you, convener. I have to come back in on that point. Yes, I absolutely agree, Councillor Hannah. We do need to get these posts in place as quickly as possible. There was an option for us to do this quickly, but we wanted to redesign the posts to ensure that we brought in people with the absolutely right skills that we need to support communities, which is why it's taken a little bit longer than normal to actually advertise these posts. But I think it's also worth clarifying that since the report in June through to the report in December, there's still been a huge amount of work undertaken by various teams right across the council to try and support our communities with poverty. And that's in various formats, and you will see that in the report in December, but there's been a lot of work done right across the board on that.
Thank you, Ms. Algie.
Thank you.
Does anyone else wish to raise anything? No. No. Do you agree the item?
Agreed.
And if there's no more items, no more questions, I'll close the meeting. and thank you very much for all attending.
Thank you.
Thank you.